Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. Josie Burns, née Williams, and I, Brett Burns, had been married for 6 years, and we were both 29 when life gave me an unexpected surprise. As a child, I was an actor, starred in many television commercials, print advertisements, and even in cameo roles in several TV shows. And when my athletic success allowed, I participated in several school and community theater productions. This experience has allowed me to cope with life's difficulties without going crazy. Josie has a model appearance and was a rapier and saber fencing star on Tufts University's Division III non-scholarship fencing team. I still weigh the same as when I was one of the stars of the MIT Division III volleyball team, and thanks to regular training, I have almost the same muscle tone. Shortly after graduating from college, we got married. At the time of our 6th anniversary, we had a very good life. We were both well employed and, although we were far from rich, we felt comfortable financially. We had, as it seemed to me, quite a satisfying both physically and emotionally active love life. We also had many friends and acquaintances. To give an idea of the context, it is necessary to provide information about 3 married couples with whom we were familiar at the time when I got into a difficult situation. John and Denise Fuller are a year younger than Josie and me, and were one of our best friends. Both look good and are engaged in physical education. Denise is the same height as John, 180 centimeters. Larry and Heather Davidson are 2 years and a year older than Josie and me, respectively, and they were good friends. Although this is certainly not a requirement for our friends, they both look good. Larry also does physical education, and Heather does dancing. Heather is about 30 centimeters shorter than Larry's height, 190 centimeters. Tim and Caroline Pruitt, respectively, are 2 years older and 2 years younger than Josie and me, and we're casual acquaintances. They're both cute. Tim is from old money, and he likes cars, boats, airplanes, and almost anything that can transport people. Caroline comes from a middle-class background. She is an aspiring artist and, as I only found out after I was abandoned in a difficult moment, is fond of martial arts. I believe she has a blue belt in Taekwondo, and she also studied karate, judo, and Brazilian jiu-jitsu for a while. Her height is 175 centimeters. Josie and I were at a party at Larry and Heather's house along with 10 other married couples, 2 unmarried couples, and several single men and women. There was an impromptu volleyball game in the backyard of their 4-bedroom house, and since I was a volleyball guru and Denise was the tallest woman, we were invited to play together against 3 men and 3 women from another team. 6:2. Doesn't it seem fair, especially considering that I wasn't allowed play at the peak? After 2 fun games, one of which we won and the other we lost, Denise and I took a break until a group of other players took our place. I was pouring Denise a glass of white wine and taking a can of soda for myself when I heard a voice that sounded very much like John's. "I can't wait to chew your carpet again," as a prelude to the game of hide the salami, and then a laugh suspiciously similar to Josie's. Stunned, I pressed myself against the wall and slowly moved to the corner between the kitchen and the hallway leading to the bathroom and peeked over the edge. I arrived just in time to see John pinch Josie's ass as she was heading to the bathroom. I saw him watching her bouncy ass walk down the hall. Just as he was about to turn and head in my direction, I darted into another room. I was shocked, but as I said, in the old days I was an experienced actor, and this talent is never lost. So I was able to keep my cool when I brought Denise a glass of wine while she was talking to a couple I didn't know. After Denise thanked me with a big smile, I just shook hands with the couple she was talking to, and then refused to talk, instead returning to playing volleyball. For the rest of the party, I tried to think about anything but how I had just been hit by a ball, and for the most part one succeeded. If it wasn't for this incident, I would have had a great time, as my smiles and laughter were fake. On the way home, Josie and I had a casual conversation about the party and the new people we met there. When we arrived at our house, she got excited, which was a common thing after a party. While I was still recovering from this turn of events, Josie was a very beautiful woman, and I did not see the need to give her up. Since I received my bachelor's degree from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, I had no problem finding the necessary equipment to determine if what I heard Josie and John talking about at the party was true or fantasy. If it was a fantasy, I wouldn't like John to be so rude and laid back that he talked to Josie the way he did, but I'd get over it. If that were true, then it would be a different matter. I believe that monogamy is the most important feature of marriage, and if the marriage contract is not terminated, then there is no place for love relationships of any kind with other people. The exact names and capabilities of the high-tech equipment that I used, most of which were too expensive to buy, but which I could easily borrow from my workplace, would tire those of you who do not have an engineering degree, so I will refrain from discussing this. Suffice it to say that it took only 2 months to find out that Josie was having an affair not only with John, but also with Larry and Tim. During my 2-month follow-up, she had 2 contacts with John and Tim and 1 with Larry, that is, on average, once every 12 days. The good news, if there could be any under the circumstances, was that Josie didn't swear at me. It was clear that after that she cleaned herself up completely, including taking a shower, and there was no difference in her desire to make love to me or cuddle up to me. The bad news is that they did not protect themselves, which required me to take tests for sexually transmitted diseases, which, fortunately, turned out to be negative. Someone may reasonably ask how I could have done nothing for 2 months and not disclose my knowledge. I would answer that I was actually an experienced actor, and also did the calculations and wanted to put everything in order before exposing her. Fortunately, circumstances allowed me to obtain an excellent video recording of 1 meeting with John and a meeting with Larry, as well as an excellent audio recording and accompanying documentation of both meetings with Tim. During these 2 months, I put all the information I had collected into forms that were easy to display, and seriously thought about how best to approach the situation, realizing that eventually I would have to divorce Josie. At that time, my main thought was that I really enjoyed being married for many reasons, not the least of which was easily available love, and that I wanted to find at least 1 more potential marriage partner before ending my relationship with Josie. There were a lot of rough edges in my plan. Exactly how events would unfold largely depended on the reaction of the people I was talking to. The only thing I was sure of was that my marriage to Josie would end soon. It was the first time I contacted Denise. Because of the 3 wives of the traders, she and I had the longest and best relationship. As part of my good relationship with her, she was consistently friendly and helpful to me. One Wednesday, I invited Denise to have lunch with me. This was not unusual, since she worked only a kilometer away from me. We met at an ordinary restaurant near her office. She greeted me very warmly, including with a wide smile, and gave me a quick kiss on the lips almost for the first time. She took my hand when we entered the establishment and cheerfully commented, "I really feel feminine with you, Brett, because even in 7-centimeter heels you are much taller than me, and I usually feel awkward in such high heels." We sat next to each other and had a casual conversation. She touched me from time to time, which I regarded as a light flirtation. After we finished, and before I paid the bill, I became serious, though not gloomy. "Listen, Denise, there's something else I really need to talk to you about. It requires us to be alone, and that's very important. Could you give me a couple of hours?" After a pause and with a worried expression on her face, she replied, "That sounds serious, Brett. Aren't you thinking about spending this weekend somewhere?" Yes. Well, I muttered. "I know that you often train on Saturday mornings, and so do I, although in a different gym. Maybe we could skip training this Saturday and meet on one of the picnic benches at the Isaac Walton Forest Preserve?" After another pause and a wrinkled nose, Denise replied, "I think it's doable. Can we meet there in the parking lot around 9 a.m.? Do you think it will take more than an hour?" Yeah, 9 a.m. sounds good, but I really think you should schedule it for 2 hours to be safe," I replied, squeezing her hand. "You're really making me worry you and Josie aren't going to break up, are you? Why are you asking about this?" I asked. "There's no reason, Brett. You always look like a couple in love, but this or a medical emergency are the only 2 things that can make you ask for an appointment." "Don't speculate about the reason," I replied with a forced smile. "Just put on your gym clothes." As we were leaving the restaurant, she took my hand and gave me an unprecedented second quick kiss on the lips. On Saturday at 8:45 in the morning, when I drove to the Isaac Walton Forest Reserve, I was all right in my head. Denise was eagerly waiting for me in the parking lot, and her anxiety seemed to increase when she saw the iPad and the envelope in my hands. We hugged in greeting, and then walked side by side, not holding hands, to a picnic table located in the distance, but still in sight of our cars. There was no one else around. "Before I tell you what I want to say, Denise, I have to warn you about something and get your consent for something else. The agreement is that I don't want you to divulge what I'm going to tell you to anyone else for a month without my consent. Do you agree with that? It's hard to agree when I don't know what it is, Denise replied with a puzzled look. I know, but I have to insist, otherwise I won't be able to continue. It's only for a month, and maybe for a shorter period, if something works out. You are welcome. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, I replied. After a long pause, during which she was obviously going over everything in her head, she replied, Okay, I agree, with a forced smile. We shook hands. It will be more difficult from now on. Please get ready, I announced as her eyes widened and she shook her head. Okay. Without further ado, I said, something John and Josie exchanged at the Davidsons' party 2 months ago made me suspicious, so I did an electronic surveillance, and this is what I found out. Then, on my iPad, I showed her the most harmless part of the love encounter between John and Josie, which I filmed. Even after that, she gasped, put her hand to her mouth, and then tears flowed from her eyes. After I stopped the video, I gently wiped the tears from her eyes, squeezed her hand and said, This is the most important part of the meeting, which was neither the first nor the last, but I'm not going to show you the X-rated part unless you demand it. You will receive the relevant documentation in my envelope. After a few more tears mostly from her, but also from me and comforting hugs, she had a lot of questions. How did I find out? How long has this been going on? Have I ever noticed any signs? Etc. She also asked if Josie had cheated on someone else, and I told her it was 2 other married men, whom I declined to name. After 20 minutes or more of this question and answer session, she asked the most important question. What are you going to do about it, Brett? Looking her straight in the eye, I answered firmly, 2 things. The first is, of course, a divorce, although not immediately, because I am a single man and I expect my woman to be a single woman. The second is to immediately start an interview in search of a new wife. I really like being married. I am absolutely sure that I was not the reason for her infidelity, and since she broke our prenuptial agreement, I see no reason not to start the interview process right now. Denise stared at me for so long that I was sure I'd have to blink first. Finally, before I gave up, she asked, What will your interview process involve? Well, I won't interview anyone I don't know yet and who I don't like, and who doesn't have a situation similar to mine. I'll want to spend some time alone with them. I will want to test them for love compatibility, and I expect that any interlocutor will also want to make sure of this, I replied. After another long and intense look, she asked, Do you have any candidates in mind? Yes, I want to start with the wives of the 3 guys she's cheating with, because I like all 3 wives. I'd like to go for a walk and have dinner with each of them and see how things are going. Denise didn't answer. She was just looking at me. I looked at my iPad and said, It's been over an hour. Why don't you think about it for a few days? Of course, I haven't processed anything for over a week, and I'm sure you won't either. Why don't we just run 3 kilometers on the treadmill of the nature, reserved to look as sweaty as if we actually went to the gym, and then go home? Remember, as long as you can do whatever you want, you must not tell anyone, especially John, about what you know. I got up and said, Let me put my iPad and envelope in the car, and then we can go for a run, and headed for the parking lot. Denise walked silently beside me. When we got to my car, I put my things in it and was about to start stretching when she ran up to me, hugged me, and looked into my eyes. I know the best way to break a sweat and kill 2 birds with 1 stone by starting the interview process, she chuckled. There's an air mattress and a can of compressed gas in the trunk of my van, she continued. As we lay there smiling and playing kissing games in post-coital euphoria, I finally regained enough of my mental faculties to speak. I have no idea why John would want to use Josie when he has you. You're a damn goddess, I blurted out. Denise smiled broadly and said, I'm asking the same question about Josie. I would never look for something strange, even if you were in my bed every night. We exchanged a few more expressions of joy, satisfaction, and hopes for future carnal pleasures. Finally, we decided it was time to dress our sweaty bodies. When I was about to get out of her van, imprinting a passionate kiss on her lips, Denise smiled and said, Until you used me half to death, I wasn't sure I could keep from killing John when faced with his betrayal, but after you turned my spine to jelly, I now know I can. Be sure to let me know about the next step in your interview process. I suppose I'm counting on a repeat call." I laughed. "That's probably the most logical assumption you've ever made in your life. I will definitely call you to discuss the details of my interview over the phone." Everything went much better with Denise than I expected. Better than I could have hoped for. Our love with her was among the top 10 in my life, and now I liked her as a person more than at 9 a.m. that day, despite the fact that I always liked her. I immediately started planning my next interviews with Heather and Caroline. When Josie and I were driving to the party on Saturday night of the day I told Denise about John's betrayal and then used her heavily, I really couldn't put in the mental and emotional effort I needed to figure out my next move, especially considering I needed to lead, I felt, as optimistic as possible in Josie's presence, and it took a lot of effort. However, my efforts were somewhat facilitated by my love affair with Denise, but it was still not easy. Imagine my surprise when Tim and Caroline turned out to be at the same party as us. We didn't know that they knew our hosts. I decided it was time to get to know Caroline better. Either Caroline was in a particularly good mood that night, or I hadn't noticed before what a warm and friendly person she was. But that evening I communicated with her more than with anyone else, including Josie and the host and hostesses. I noticed that Tim and Josie were giving each other sly looks, but they tried not to communicate with each other much. During one of my many conversations with Caroline, she mentioned that Tim was going to the car dealership the next day, Sunday. The owners were rich, and they even had a ballroom in their mini mansion. Although Caroline modestly admitted that she was not a very good dancer, I took her to the dance floor for at least a dozen dances, and she was no worse than me, although some of her fast dance moves were more like Taekwondo techniques. I realized that the party was coming to an end when the DJ played one of the few slow songs of the evening and took Caroline in his arms. I was surprised when she pressed her chest against me and rested her head on my shoulder. I'm not an expert on bra size, but I'd be shocked if they weren't at least a size 4. Anyway, after we danced for a while, I held her at arm's length and said, "Caroline, I feel like I got to know you better tonight, and I really need to discuss something with you. Could you meet me tomorrow when Tim is at the auto show?" She smiled and then playfully replied, "I'm not cheating, big boy. We can meet in a public, albeit quiet place. My intention is just to give you some information that you might be interested in. Are you going to try to sell me Yemeni bonds or Mary Kay cosmetics?" She giggled. I smiled, and then she continued, "I'm just teasing you, Brett. Why don't you come to my art studio? It's in the building behind our house. Tomorrow around 10 a.m., and you can tell me about your promotional offer." "I'll see you then," I replied, and then smoothly pulled her to me to finish our dance. On the way home, Josie and I were in a good mood and chatted the whole way. At one point, she said, "I thought you and Caroline Pruitt got along well today." "Yes," I replied. "I really like her. I used to think she was weird and a little reserved, but she seems sweet and more balanced than I had previously assumed." It reminded me that she showed me some of her work on the phone and said that I could come to her studio tomorrow around 10 in the morning. "I'm thinking of buying something for my parents for their 40th anniversary. Do you want to come with me?" I only asked Josie to come with me because I knew she had other things to do in the morning. "It's all right," was Josie's reply. "You know better than me what your parents will like. Let me know if you see anything that we might like for our house, okay?" "Of course," I grinned, sliding my hand down her thigh under her dress. She smiled back. I arrived at Caroline's studio at 10 o'clock sharp. She was wearing short shorts and a tank top. I really regret that she dressed like that, because looking at her, it was hard not to fall into a stupor. She explained her appearance in words, "Sorry about my casual clothes, but I'm in the middle of a project and I'll be working on it after you leave." After we chatted a bit and I looked around a bit, I said, "After I talk to you about what I want to tell you, would you mind if I took a look at some of your work to buy my parents a 40th birthday present?" "I don't think you can afford me," she laughed, "but I'll let you." I made her swear that she would not tell anyone about what I was going to tell for a month without my permission, and she readily agreed. Then I sat down next to Caroline and gave her the same information as Denise. Only since I only had audio recordings, I reproduced more details than I had told Denise and showed photos of Tim and Josie entering and exiting the hotel with dates and timestamps. I also informed her that Josie was cheating on me with 2 other guys, although I refused to give their names. Caroline burst into tears, but her reaction was nothing like Denise's. I was puzzled, but I waited for her to speak. "Unfortunately, I'm not surprised by this. 2 years ago, I suspected Tim of having an affair with another woman and told him about it. He basically swore he didn't do it, but he won't do it again, she smiled grimly. I have proof this time, but do you think you can get the video? I'll try if that's what you want, I replied. What are you going to do about it, Brett? Looking her straight in the eye, I firmly answered the same way as in the case of Denise. 2 things. The first is, of course, a divorce, although not immediately, because I am a single man and I expect my woman to be a single woman. The second is to immediately start an interview in order to find a new wife. I really like being married. I am absolutely sure that I was not the cause of her infidelity, and since she violated our marriage vows, I see no reason not to start the interview process right now. Unlike Denise, Caroline did not hesitate to ask a clarifying question. What will be your interview process? Well, I won't interview anyone I don't know yet and who I don't like, and who has a situation unlike mine. I'll want to spend some time alone with them, and I will want to test them for love compatibility, and I expect that any interlocutor will also want to make sure of this, I replied. After another long and intense look, she asked, do you have any candidates in mind? Yes, I want to start with the wives of the 3 guys she's cheating with because I really like all 3 wives. I'd like to go for a walk and have dinner with each of them and see how things are going. Caroline looked at me strangely, but she didn't object, so I continued. If you're interested in an interview, I smiled, let me know next week. Now, can I take a look at your work? Despite the seriousness of our previous conversation, Caroline smiled at me sincerely and said, good. She took me through her studio, showing me about a dozen completed works, a few paintings, but most sculptures, and 3 sculptures in various stages of completion. There was one thing that I really liked. It was an aerial sculpture 30 centimeters high, depicting a scantily clad couple dancing together, and it was called the Empyrean Bolero. I'd really like to buy this, I said, pointing to the Empyrean Bolero. I like it. This is yours, she said. No way, I replied. I insist on paying for it. Caroline's eyes lit up. Okay, she said, $500 and a preview to see if it's worth interviewing you? What kind of viewing? I asked. $500, she said, holding out her hand. I took out my checkbook, wrote out a check, and handed it to her. I'll call you about the interview tomorrow or Tuesday, she continued. What is your mobile phone number? I told it to her. She entered it into her phone, made a test call, then said, I need to sit down for a while. You really aroused me. Then she turned her back on me, walked to a remote part of her studio and sat down. I didn't have as close a relationship with Heather as I did with Denise, and I don't think it would have developed as quickly as it did with Caroline. That's why I didn't know how to approach her. I had never had lunch with her before, and since she taught dance far from my office, I didn't want to invite her to lunch. And then it dawned on me. As my electronic surveillance of Josie continued, on Monday, after a Sunday visit to Caroline's art studio, I found out that Heather's students were having a recital the following Saturday, and Larry was using that time to meet Josie again. She had already prepared an excuse to go to the spa. I decided to attend the concert and talk to Heather after it. This week, the interview process with Denise and Caroline has also moved forward. They both called me on Tuesday, and I arranged for Caroline and me to go to the largest local art museum on Wednesday, and on Thursday we would go on a picnic with Denise, which would last until late in the evening. Thanks to my unique job, I could relax at any time convenient for me. My job was to independently develop, without any supervision, a secret product for a large company that I worked for. The machine I was developing had passed the design stage, and I was just acquiring all the necessary components to build and write software to prepare it for alpha and then beta testing. I have never connected to the internet at work, using only local computer systems in the house. I was well ahead of schedule by about 45 days, so I had no worries that I wouldn't finish work on time. And there were several important components that hadn't arrived for almost a month, so I had a lot of downtime if I wanted to. I really wanted it to help organize my interviews. Going to the art museum with Caroline on Wednesday was instructive. It was obvious that she had interviewed me as much as I had interviewed her. Our conversations were lively, and her observations were profound. It was obvious that despite the difference in our education, she has art, she has mining, we are on the same intellectual level. We had significant non-love-related physical contact as much as possible, given that we were in public, including holding hands for most of the day after having lunch together. I really liked Caroline as a person. I was also very inspired by her appearance, especially when she coquettishly showed off her cleavage when she was sure that no one else was looking. I really wanted to speed up the interview process with Caroline. I told her about it when we kissed goodbye. It was also a nice, passionate kiss. A picnic with Denise turned into an all-day walk. After we ate and laughed during a picnic in the same forest reserve where we met last Saturday, Denise wanted to walk around the city where we lived, and then play video games in the local game room and take part in a free avant-garde production, which was held outdoors in the bandstand in the main city park. We had almost constant physical contact, and, as in the case of Caroline the day before, it turned out that Denise interviewed me the same way I interviewed her. She seemed really interested in whether we were compatible in more ways than just love. Obviously, she believed, and I totally agreed with her. If that was her belief, that the 70 minutes or so we spent in her van on Saturday demonstrated that love compatibility was undeniable. By the end of Thursday afternoon, I had arranged to meet Caroline and Denise again next week. The concert at the dance studio where Heather taught and in which she was a co-owner was actually quite enjoyable. There was even an episode involving Heather and another female dance instructor. Heather was incredibly good. After all the audience had dispersed, I went up to Heather and told her that I really enjoyed the performance. She was very surprised, but obviously glad to see me. Holding the iPad in my hands, I told her that I needed to talk to her about something. She said I had to come to her office in another 20 minutes, and then we could talk in private. When I walked into Heather's office, despite the wide smile on her face, she looked worried. After getting her consent not to tell anyone anything for a month without my permission, I first played the audio recording of Larry and Josie making an appointment during the concert, and then showed her an abbreviated but convincing part of the video recording of Larry and Josie together. Heather's reaction was somewhere between Caroline's expected and Denise's hysteria. At one point, Heather said, "The only reason I'm not even more upset is that I've been thinking about having an affair myself, even though I've never even taken the first step in that direction." Heather basically asked the same questions as the others, including what I was going to do about it, and I gave exactly the same answer. After a moment's thought, she said, "In other words, are you going to have an affair or several affairs before you leave her?" "Maybe. But my interview process doesn't have to be pretty before I dump Josie just before I get married again. Besides, after she had 3 affairs, in my opinion, my answer is not a novel, but a study." She smiled back at that. We talked for about an hour about relationships, Josie, Larry, and other people we both knew. When I got ready to leave, Heather seemed to be feeling somewhat normal. "Can you face Larry face to face without breaking down?" I asked. "I think so," she replied with a faint smile. "Are you interested in interviewing for the position of my second wife?" I asked with a mischievous smile. "I'll call you next week," she replied. But then, with a twinkle in her eyes, she added, "It would probably be useful to know how you kiss, although kissing is very important to me." I went up to her, hugged her tightly, lifted her off the ground, and then imprinted as passionate a kiss as possible on her lips. When I put her feet on the ground, she smiled. "Well, at least you passed this test and I didn't." "Of course," I grinned, and then gave her another quick kiss and left. Over the next few weeks, the situation became very interesting. The first interesting thing was that Josie and her love buddies suspected something. As my constant electronic surveillance showed, Josie was the first to have concerns, and she was the first to share her suspicions with John. "There really is something strange going on in my house, John. I can't say for sure if Brett has doubts about my activities, but I know something is wrong," Josie said in a phone conversation on a cell phone she didn't even know was bugged. "Has he stopped making love to you?" John asked. "No. The frequency may have dropped a little, but the intensity is even greater than before, and the love with him has always been intense. I do not know why, but for some reason it seems to me that everything is different. Physically, it's amazing," she said before John interrupted her. "Second only to me," he grinned. "Yeah, keep telling yourself that," she chuckled before continuing. "But it's not that loving." "Not a very good sign," John replied, then, after a pause, continued. "To be honest, I've noticed a change in Denise lately too. She's not that hot, and sometimes she has a glazed look accompanied by a satisfied smile, but unfortunately it's not after we just made love." We'd better cool off a bit, Josie hastened to suggest. If they had proof, I know Brett would have come out against me, but let's not let them get it. I intend to use him so often and passionately that he won't have time to think about it. No doubt imagining it was me, John put in. Yeah, keep believing in that fantasy, Josie chuckled again. Let's see how things will develop over the next month or 6 weeks, then I will contact you again on your mobile phone. Sounds like a plan, sweet cheeks, John retorted before they both broke off the conversation. Over the next 2 days, Josie had similar conversations with Tim and Larry. None of the 3 guys knew about the other 2, which went much the same way as with John. Of course, I took this news as great, but not because I was not going to divorce Josie, but because I could stop periodically taking tests for diseases and because I would really have a great love. Even though I no longer loved Josie, if I liked cheaters, I would gladly pay her $1,000 an hour, because she is a beautiful woman and knows how to make love very well. So if I could hire a cheater for free for $1,000 an hour, what could I complain about? The second interesting point was how accommodating all 3 women I interviewed for Josie's replacement were. They were very interested in determining compatibility outside of bed, but had no visible qualms about establishing it in bed. I worked with each of them for about 10 hours a week, on 2 different days, mostly bad things. But in addition to the mental and emotional ones, they were physical. There was also love activity. Denise craved love every week. I no longer enjoy making love with John, both because he cheated and because, frankly, making love with you is much better, Denise flattered me. It made me wonder why Josie was making love to John, given her position in the last phone conversation with him, when she even said that making love with me was better, and now Denise has apparently confirmed it, because Denise was not a nerd, and there was no simulation of powerful and debilitating. That's what she had with me. After the first week, when I went to the art museum only with Caroline, she was also eager to determine love compatibility. On Monday, when we came to her art studio after our trip to the museum, she greeted me with a passionate kiss. That day demonstrated that Caroline and I are definitely lovingly compatible. Heather was the last person I tested for love compatibility. By the time I did, we had already been on 3 walks together. When I picked her up on the 4th, she opened the door naked except for her high-heeled shoes. Larry's out of town, she chuckled. So let's set up a meeting instead of a walk, she giggled. Again, there was no doubt that Heather and I were lovingly compatible. Over the next few weeks, well, after the monthly deadline we all agreed on, had exceptionally pleasant love with each of my interlocutors once or twice a week. At this time, Josie was also on a crusade, trying to grind me to powder in order to dispel any suspicions I might have about her extramarital affairs. I was by far the most lovingly satisfied I've ever been in my life. However, I came to the point where I wanted it to be over. I wanted to have a loving wife again, and it was unfair to anyone to delay this process any longer. Despite my obvious love compatibility with Heather and despite the fact that I really liked her, I didn't feel any sympathy for her. Fortunately, we were able to end the relationship on really good terms. After another amazing love affair in the bedroom, when Larry was out of town, I realized that she had something on her mind. "Why are you so thoughtful, beautiful?" I asked. "I really need to talk to you about something. I don't know how you're doing with finding a new wife, but I thought I should put my cards on the table," Hader sighed. "Honesty is the best policy," I replied sincerely. "Okay, let's get started," she continued. "Overall, love with you is the best I've ever had. However, I'm not in love with you. But after you revealed Larry's infidelity to me, I talked to myself. Although love with you is the best, now I have a lover, and love with her is almost as good. Besides, I'm in love with her," Heather continued, tears welling up in her left eye. I wiped away a tear, smiled at her and said, "You can't deny yourself your true feelings. Who is this lucky girl?" "She is one of the co-owners of our dance studio, as well as a dance teacher named Vivian." "Is this the one who performed with you at the concert I went to?" I asked excitedly. "Yes. Did you notice her?" "Yes, damn it. She's almost as beautiful as you are, and if her personality and character are at least half of her beauty, then it's no wonder you fell in love with her," I smiled. "So you're not mad at me for excluding myself from the list of candidates for a wife?" "What is it?" she asked cautiously. "Hell, no. I'm happy for you," I replied, and Heather smiled broadly. Then a devilish smile appeared on Heather's face. Tomorrow, I'm going to tell Vivian that I want to be exclusive with her. She's been hinting at it ever since we became close. Sounds like a plan, I grinned. After we showered together no more love and got dressed, we rationally planned when to expose Larry and Josie's relationship and agreed to contact the same divorce lawyer. I gave Heather copies of all the information I had about Larry and Josie's relationship, and I was also going to give copies to the divorce lawyer I chose shortly after I learned about Josie's activities. We kissed goodbye and promised to attend each other's weddings and remain friends. I was looking for an opportunity to test her interest in becoming the second Mrs. Brett Burns and fully appreciate and then express my feelings when luck smiled on me again. After Caroline and I had perhaps the best love of my life. One Saturday afternoon, when Tim was at another car dealership, she sat on the bed in their largest guest room and said, "Brett, we need to be honest with each other. It's been over a month since you told me about Tim and Josie's relationship, and we need to come to some conclusion." I sat down too, took her hands and said, "You're absolutely right. Before you tell me how you feel, let me tell you how I feel." "I don't want you to be mad at me," she said. I grinned and replied, "Do you think I can get mad at anything?" "That's a good idea," she laughed, and then continued seriously. "First of all, I have to tell you that you are a wonderful guy and that I made love to you the best of all. However, I don't feel the same love for you that I felt for Tim when we got married." I hoped she was serious, because although I would always remember how I used her and my feelings about how wonderful she was, there was no spark of love in me either. "I understand," I smiled. "Secondly, since it's been a month since you told me about Josie and Tim's relationship, last week I informed Tim of the information you provided me, warning him that if he told Josie about it, I would immediately divorce him and send him to the next world. Because we have moral principles, and this is provided for in our marriage contract. But the problem is, I still love that fool, and I noticed that in none of the materials you gave me, he never said anything bad about me." "Most likely," I replied gloomily. "That's why I made it clear to him that everything will change if we want to stay together. I gave him an ultimatum. We're getting divorced now, and I'm fulfilling the terms of the prenup, or we're signing a new prenup, which has completely draconian consequences if either of us ever cheat again. So egregious that the only option we have is to get divorced first before getting into any kind of relationship. A relationship with someone else." "He begged me to agree to the second option," Caroline said. "Are you going to agree?" I asked. "Yes, in fact, our lawyer has already prepared a draft marriage contract. We have read it, and we are both ready to sign it," she replied. Then a malicious expression appeared on her face, and she continued, "Of course, I deliberately haven't signed it yet so that I can spend this last session with you without breaking it. Without our relationship, I wouldn't be able to apply the approach that I have. However, my fruitful love relationship with you allowed me to take revenge, which I needed so much even if he never finds out about it, and gave me the opportunity to move on. I hope you understand," she sighed. A big smile appeared on my face. "Okay, so your marriage contract doesn't take effect until tomorrow, which means that today I have another chance to get you, right?" "You're a fool," she laughed. "You've already had 2 ejaculations today. Are you some kind of machine?" "No, it's not. But just the thought of using you again made my little soldier salute. And I'm damn sure I'll try," I giggled. Half an hour later, when we were fully dressed and kissed goodbye, Caroline said, "Part of the deal is that Tim should avoid Josie in the future. Therefore, I am afraid that we will never have communication again, which will hurt me, but is necessary for both me and Tim. Does this mean that I will no longer be able to buy works of art from you?" I groaned. "No, it just has to be over the internet," she chuckled, giving me another quick kiss and then closing the door. Unless I was going to expand my list of candidates for wife number 2, there was only one option left, Denise. The good news, at least I hoped it was good news, was that I fell madly in love with Denise. I definitely loved her as much as I loved Josie when we got married, maybe more. I hoped she felt the same way at least. I had no doubt that I was the best love partner in the world for her. 2 days after I settled things with Caroline, Denise and I were able to spend the night together for the first time. Both John and Josie were out of town that same Friday evening, and I was able to confirm from my observation that they had not spoken since their last conversation on their cell phone, except for the case when 4 couples, including John, Denise, and Josie and I, had dinner together a week earlier. I was also able to confirm using the phone's GPS and the plane records that I hacked that they were in cities 2,500 kilometers apart that Friday evening. To avoid being noticed, Denise and I checked into a hotel in a nearby suburb after dinner and dancing, using excellent fake documents that I produced and copied electronically. There was no lovemaking that night. I had no doubt that it was the most real lovemaking, including a delightful session when we woke each other up around 3:30 a.m. After another session of love, the next morning it was time to do the real thing. When Denise and I were lying in bed almost nose to nose, after brushing our teeth, I began the conversation by saying, "I know without a doubt who I want to see as the next Mrs. Brett Burns. You know, don't you?" Denise grinned. "Are you sure this woman wants to be the next Mrs. Brett Burns?" "No, I'm not sure, but I hope to find out soon. I know for sure that I love her, and making love to her is the most enjoyable thing I've ever experienced in my life. And I want her to bear me children." "You love, don't you?" She smiled slyly. "Yes, this is true. Denise Fuller, will you change your last name again and make me the happiest person in the world by becoming my second wife after you, and I leave the cheaters we are currently married to?" Let me think about it," she giggled, propping her chin on her fist as if she were Rodin's statue of the thinker. "Oh, you fool." I laughed and began to tickle her. "You made me fall in love with you, but now you're torturing me," I said over and over, tickling her. After about 30 seconds, she asked, "Will you stop tickling me if I agree to marry you?" "Yes," I growled. Okay, I'll marry you when we're finally divorced," she laughed. I kissed her hard, not laughing anymore. "I love you with all my heart, body, and soul," I murmured between kisses. "I love you too, Brett," was the last thing she muttered before I entered her again. I coordinated with Heather, and she, Denise, and I presented our evidence to Larry, John, and Josie at the same time. We all had the same lawyer, who almost simultaneously arranged for 3 bailiffs to come to our house to serve documents. Surprisingly, John and Josie were just shocked when they were served and begged us not to take off, but to figure everything out. Larry was more optimistic, because I think he had felt for a long time that Heather was unhappy, and seemed resigned when Heather told him that his cheating had made her rethink herself and come to the conclusion that she had feelings for Vivian and was leaving him for her. Larry did not resist the divorce. After Josie regained her composure, she tried to apply her version of rational thinking. "Brett, I know that it hurts you, but my love affairs have never had a negative effect on you. You were the only one I gave my love to. My novels were just the cherry on the cake of the wonderful banana split that was our life. It's not helping, Josie. I'm only interested in monogamy, and you know it perfectly well. I was very careful and never threw it in your face. I didn't want you to find out, Brett." "Oh, but I did. Most traitors get caught," I replied. "Actually, this is not true, but I did not take the oath. You're making too much of this, Brett. Even the Pope, you were a Catholic and respected him, says that adultery is not so terrible." Funny, I laughed, thinking she was being ridiculous, doing her best. "No, it's true," she said, desperately searching for her phone. She fished it out of her purse, clicked the mouse a few times, and then rephrased the text on the screen. "This is what the Pope said, supporting the Archbishop of Paris, whose resignation was demanded by people. Carnal sins are not the most serious." The Pope mentioned the violation of the 6th commandment, the prohibition of adultery, saying that it was not a total violation. Adultery is not the most serious, because carnal sins are not the most serious. She handed me the phone. As I read, I smiled slyly. She interpreted exactly what the Pope had said. I returned the phone to her and said, "Then marry the Pope, because he obviously wouldn't mind you using him, but I'm against it." With that, I got up and left, accompanied by her screams, which I took to be the chorus of Hallelujah. Denise and I have already moved all the things we wanted to take with us to the apartment we rented together. We really enjoyed our premarital life with each other. We let John and Josie try to mend their relationship with us until it cost us a lot of money. Then, because in the state in which we live, divorces are resolved without mistakes, we made it clear to them that we live together, love each other, and are going to get married as soon as our divorces become final. This exasperated them, and soon after, agreements were reached on both divorces. which became final within 3 months. The epilogue. Denise and I got married 2 months after our divorces became final. Heather and her new wife Vivian were the only friends who attended our simple ceremony and reception, and the rest of those present were just family members. Denise really wanted to have children, so she stopped taking contraceptives after we were married for only 6 months. By that time, we had both decided and told each other that we loved each other more than we ever loved our exes. Denise became pregnant shortly after she stopped using contraceptives. Now we have 2 girls and a boy who are the light of our lives. Denise and I thought John and Josie might get together. As far as we know, this never happened at all, and it seems like it never will, because a couple of months after our divorce, they both moved from our neighborhood to places more than 1,500 kilometers away from each other. We haven't talked to Larry, and we don't hope to. I bought 3 pieces of art from Caroline over the internet. When she sent them to me, she indicated in the invoices a 50% discount from GF. I hope that girlfriend means great love, but I'm not going to ask her about it, although I gladly accepted the discount. End.